and welcome to another weekly Wednesday Kickstarter roundup from Rule of Carnage, bringing together all the best that Kickstarter has for the tabletop miniatures gamer. A little bit of a quieter week this week. We had a few really big weeks of the last few, so still lots of really cool stuff out there. We've got a game campaign, a bunch of physical model reward campaigns, some STLs and the usual pay what you want. We're going to launch straight in with that game campaign, and it is Mousetown Mayhem tabletop skirmish game by Dead Dodo Sculpts. This is a fun, cute skirmish game that's coming out from a creator who's put out STL file rewards before. What's quite nice about this campaign is the campaign has everything that you need to play the game. All the STLs, not just of the combatants, but also of the terrain, the location, all the bits and pieces. So the game itself is a collection of mice coming out from their homes to look for, collect, gather more cheese than the other set of mice. So it's something that's quite cute, fun. I think it'd be a great game to introduce maybe the younger gamers in your life, because everything's 3D printable and it's got quite a small footprint. I think you've got a quite nice easy entry level option available. There don't seem to be, massive sets of details on the exact rules of the game on the campaign, but there is a free download STL mini, so you may as well jump in, give it a look over. And if you've got somebody younger in your life you're looking to introduce into the hobby, get playing, a younger family member you'd like available as a regular opponent, I think this is probably a great way to sort of introduce them gently to the hobby, give them a game that isn't necessarily hyper violent and has a bit of fun, younger sort of cartooniness elements to it. Well worth checking out and well worth giving a look over. Okay, moving on from game campaigns to our physical model rewards. First of our physical model reward campaigns this week, we've got the Barbarians by Celtic Miniatures. If you watch the channel regularly, you know that Celtic Miniatures are kind of friends of the channel. They sent us through samples of their various Kickstarters, and I've put together videos assembling and painting them for use at conventions. I found them really easy to put together, extremely simple to paint. Really sort of old school, very paintable, really strong looking minis with a strong aesthetic and very usable, very playable. Some 3D printed STL sort of style minis can be a little bit fragile or can have details that you can't quite get to and get into. These guys have that more sort of old school feel, and it also means they have that old school paintability to them. This particular campaign is for a set of barbarians, sure, sort of marauders, horned helmet wearing guys with clubs and swords and riding some sort of light cavalry steeds. So these guys would work, I think, very neatly for a whole range of settings. Anything that has sort of violent, thuggish human beings in it, these are going to work great for. So really, that's any fantasy setting and a good deal of historic settings, to be honest. There's plenty in here for a couple of units of infantry and a unit of light cavalry. Because the minis are modular, they come in sort of pieces, you can reuse, reprint, buy multiple sets of them to fill out multiple units. So super convenient, really modular, lots of options, lots of things you can do with them. Definitely look in if you're looking to pick up some really usable, really paintable, armed, violent human thug types for whenever you're playing, whether it's a smaller skirmish game right up to a large mass battle. Okay, next up for our physical model rewards, we've got Anyaral, The Rivers of Anyaral by World of Twilight. This is, I think, a really interesting, really nice set of sort of unusual anthropomorphic sort of creature miniatures from a repeat creator who's been around for a little while, has a sort of narrative, independent skirmish war game Twilight, which is available to pick up from their website. And this is a set of minis for sort of a set of scenarios, or just a general sort of setting for playing along sort of a river setting. So you've got a riverboat available, along with some suitably sort of aquatic looking, fishy, froggy sort of creature beings. So these are really lovely sculpts. They have a lovely feel to them. I think it's interesting that we were sort of we mentioned the mouse-based game earlier on. These would work really perfectly along with those for something like Badgers and Burrows, something that just has a bit of a more sort of anthropomorphic animal, slightly sort of fairy tale sort of feeling to it. I think it's a lovely setting. I think they're lovely minis. I think Twilight itself is well worth checking out. And I think generally just sort of picking up some unusual feeling settings. If you're into skirmish based, miniatures agnostic, narrative style gaming, well worth checking out these minis and considering some scenarios you could build around the ship and the river folk that come with it. So well worth giving a look over. Next up for our physical model rewards, we've got Medieval Village Expansion Set 6mm 1 in 300th by Philip Page. So I've been lucky enough to actually be able to see some of these minis sort of in the flesh at conventions before. These are really extremely well detailed small 6mm scale terrain. I really like small scale gaming. It gives you the opportunity to get in a huge epic game without having to paint masses and masses of miniatures, you know, also, you know, quick to print, quick to assemble, and you can play out what would be a big table game on a lap tray in front of the TV. Great for soloing particularly. This particular set of terrain, these are 6mm buildings with detailed interiors, so you could literally play an actual skirmish 6mm game where you can go in and out of buildings and have sort of elements, objectives, you know, defensive positions, all those sorts of things that you really, you know, you sort of generally associate with larger scale gaming, having buildings, you know, that you can take the roof off of and play within. You can do with these guys. You can take the roofs off. They do have detailed interiors. So I think that makes them, you know, super cool, really usable, loads of options. If you're into any kind of skirmish gaming, you know, if you are, as many I think gamers are, struggling for storage, struggling for space, maybe struggling to get games in all the time when you have to set up a massive table, you should really consider smaller 6mm gaming. And if you're considering that, or if you're into it already, you should absolutely pick up this campaign. You know, they're a lovely set of terrain that would fill out normally, you know, a tabletop will fill out a tabletop, it just happens to be smaller, that you could keep in a tiny little box on your shelf. Really cool, well worth checking out, well worth considering converting whatever your favourite skirmish game is down into a smaller scale, getting in more games, getting more systems onto the shelf, and getting more stuff onto the table. Well worth checking this one out. Next up for our physical reward campaigns, we've got Project Blackstar by Strange Plastic. This, I think, is a really lovely, very interesting set of minis, based on the artwork of Pascal Blanche. This has, I would say, sort of 2 to 3 units worth of good guy or hero miniatures, and then a couple of units of some sort of alien beasts and the victims thereof. So I think what this campaign does quite neatly is give the correct number of miniatures to play out a small self-contained narrative sci-fi skirmish game across a handful of scenarios with a really strong and very beautiful sort of IP setting, world, whatever you want to call it, that you can absolutely read in the miniatures without having it all necessarily spelled out for you. So if you are interested in sci-fi, miniatures agnostic, narrative, skirmish gaming, particularly if you want something that has possibly a bit of a horror feel to it, a sort of horror edge, because the alien miniatures definitely have something quite disturbing and horrific sort of going on with them. I think this is an absolutely perfect campaign to pick up all the minis for. I think these are the sorts of minis that will instantly write a set of linking scenarios, suggest a narrative to you, and allow you to really put together something really fun and interesting, possibly as a versus game. I think this would make a great set of solo scenarios. Well worth checking out just for the sheer style of the miniatures, and well worth considering what you can do with them, what you can write, what you can put together for them. Okay, next up for our physical model rewards, we've got Poilus Dorient, French Army in the Middle East by De Frances or Barricades. First of all, apologies for any pronunciation there. This is a set of physical models and STL files available, so you've got a couple of options there for French troops from the First World War all the way through the interwar period and parts of World War II. That they would work well for troops that were fighting in the Middle East. So there's a lot of options for these guys insofar as historical gaming goes. You can absolutely cover parts of both of the major world wars and various conflicts in the interwar period. So you've got lots of options there. Also, I think these guys would work really nicely for any sort of alternative history, sort of kit bashing, various options, miniatures agnostic, sort of weird world war, all those sorts of bits and pieces. What I particularly like about these sets of models is that there are sort of non-directly combat related sort of miniatures. There's a war reporter miniature in there with a sort of an old-fashioned camera, which I think is an absolutely brilliant miniature. It gives a real sort of bit of life to a game, to a setting, and it's always difficult to get hold of non sort of heavily armed minis for doing things like dioramas or settings or things of that nature. So the campaign itself is for miniatures and STL files. This is also a game that was previously available in French and has just recently been translated over into English. So if you're looking for a fast-playing skirmish game set within the sort of interwar period through First World, Second World War, there's a really interesting set of rules here available. So well worth checking out, well worth giving a look over, maybe seeing if there's a new rule set that you'd like to pick up, and certainly I think there are some very cool minis well worth checking out. So give this one a look over. Okay, that's it for our physical model rewards. Moving on to our STL file campaigns. First up we've got Base Boost, 3D printable terrain for fantasy and sci-fi games by Tega Miniatures. So we see 3D printable base campaigns reasonably regularly on Kickstarter, but it's been a little while since we've seen a nice one, and this is a really nice one, so it's well worth covering. This is for sets of themed sculpted bases with some really nice themes actually. So there's a sort of magical mystical forest set, there's a pirate desert island one that I particularly am enjoying, with like treasure sets and sort of little buried things and beasties in there. City Ruins, which could be a sort of post-apocalyptic set, sci-fi experiment, so something a bit science fictiony, and the Necropolis Dungeon set. So you've got a whole sort of range of settings. One of the things I think is super nice here is that you've got round bases, oval bases, square bases, hex bases. You don't necessarily often see hex-based campaigns. So this is covering like all of the bases for your bases, if you know what I mean, with a really neat set of very strongly themed, really cool looking STL sculpts for putting together a force that's going to be themed, going to have a sort of setting, going to have a feeling to it. I really think that bases are often one of the sort of least fun and exciting bits of putting together a miniature, and people sometimes skimp on the detail there. I think it's a huge mistake, because it's one of the things that ties together a force and gives them a real feel and sense to them. So having really cool, fun, pre-printed bases that you can actually be excited about painting and looking at and getting into, I think is a huge benefit for making your forces look unified and look cool. So well worth checking this one out if you don't already have a set of STLs for bases, and I'd argue well worth giving this one a look over even if you do, because there's some nice, fun, unusual settings here. Well worth giving it a look. Okay, next up for our STL file campaigns, we've got Beestwars Tabletop Miniatures STLs for 3D printing by Gary Hunt Miniatures. I think this is a really interesting campaign, and particularly because it has sets of miniatures in it that are just well outside of the norm. So this is a collection of miniatures, several units for a handful of different forces. You've got a sort of Minotaur force, which is something that isn't super unusual. We do see, but not massive amounts of. Some sort of crocodile lizardmen forces, which again, you know, you do see lizardmen, but these guys I do think feel a bit beefier, a bit chunkier. The ones that really caught my eye, a set of dwarven tuskers, so sort of were-pig dwarves sort of thing going on, which I think, well, that's new, that's interesting, that's fun, you know, well worth checking that one out. And the set of hyena men, so sort of hyena riding human hybrid sort of crosses. So look, unusual miniatures are worth checking out, unusual sculpts, unusual settings, and I think these are a really cool set of sculpts. Lots of detail to them, a really strong feel of the sort of brutality and viciousness that you might expect from, you know, wild boar dwarves and crocodile men and of course minotaurs. So if you're into miniatures agnostic, fantasy skirmish gaming, up to, I would say, sort of low level mass battle, and you fancy some really unusual, interesting, fun beast, you know, creature style, you know, barbarian beasties, well worth checking this campaign out. Some really unusual, fun ideas, some cool sculpts, well worth giving it a look over. Okay, next up for our STL file campaigns, we've got Echoes of the Void, STLs for 3D printing by Monolith Arts. We see a few campaigns with sort of Soulsborne style feeling sculpts to them. Sometimes they are sets of single miniatures, and it's hard to consider using them in a skirmish game where, whilst you can sometimes get away with a bunch of individuals, you do want the odd unit and you want things to feel like they work like each other. This is a really nice campaign if you want that very sort of extreme look to your minis, but you also want them to have the practicality of being able to form units on the tabletop. Because whilst each of these sculpts feel like individuals, they've been put together in different poses with different armaments, so you could absolutely play them as small units of similar guys. So if you're playing anything with a sort of skirmish squad based sort of system, I would say, you know, from small obviously warband level up to this would do, I think, a small to medium sized mass battle. There are so many minis that can be put into units and formed up within this campaign. I think you could have a decent sized full army of these very cool, very sort of extreme looking, like I say, you know, Soulsborne style aesthetic to them minis very happily on the tabletop. If that's an aesthetic, if that's a feel, a sense of design that has caught your eye and you like the feel of the style of, this is a great campaign to get up a set of STLs that you could very happily and very practically use for an army on the tabletop. So well worth checking that one out. Okay, next up for our STL file campaigns, we've got Magna Fortuna 3D printable sci-fi terrain by Corvus Games Terrain. It's always handy to have a set of sci-fi terrain that you can use for a whole bunch of settings, a whole bunch of worlds, particularly if you're a minis agnostic gamer, you like to sort of switch up your settings. This is a campaign for a set of terrain that could work in pretty much any sci-fi setting you can imagine. These guys would work great for cyberpunk, post-apocalyptic, far future, you know, anything sort of really with that sort of sci-fi or even near modern, near future setting, all the way through into sort of far and distant future settings. What's particularly useful, particularly cool about them, lots of flat roofs, lots of balconies, lots of walkways, lots of open flat things you can get minis up onto and get playing some nice multi-level battles and work on some sort of raised line of sight. It's always good fun to have minis on walkways and minis below them and minis above them and get that sort of multi-level play going on. We often sort of play too much in a sort of 2D setting, I think, on our tabletops. So if you don't have a set of sci-fi terrain, this is a solid set of, you know, table filling, very playable, very practical, multi-setting, sort of fulfilling sci-fi terrain. This is a really strong one to sort of be a starter, a basis for a library, a basis for a table, or for filling out some sort of gaps in a collection that you've already got. Well worth checking this one out, well worth giving it a look over, and yeah, slotting into the library. Okay, that's it for our standard reward campaigns. As usual, we've got a Pay What You Want campaign, and this week's Pay What You Want campaign is Pay What You Want Village by Galt Velis. This is quite a small campaign, I think, even for a Pay What You Want. The Pay What You Want level, as is often the case, has got a Pay What You Want with some upgraded options. The Pay What You Want level is essentially a brick outhouse. A small sort of 2-inch square building, self-standing, self-sustaining, so, you know, a small shed, an outhouse, something of that nature. It's a handy little piece. It's always good to have sort of, you know, a single small line of sight blocking scale building that you can just drop in anywhere, and it could be an option for an objective, things of that nature. The upgraded levels are a nice solid set of village style buildings that would work in a bunch of settings. They'd work happily in, you know, historic, they'd work in fantasy. There's lots of options available here. Worth, I think, swinging by, picking up the Pay What You Want level, dropping into the library, having it available to pull out, and if the other pieces do catch your eye, you know, upgrade through, get the full set, get the all-in. I think it's got about 20 or so STL files, so I'm sure there's something that might catch your eye in there, but, you know, well worth swinging by, picking up the Pay What You Want level at a level that you want to pay, that you think is good value, and, you know, building out that library of little pieces here and there and building yourself up some more options. Okay, that is it for this week. You know, a handful, I think, of interesting campaigns this week. Lots of physical model reward campaigns. You know, almost more than STL files this week, which is lovely to see. We don't see enough physical rewards, I think, on Kickstarter because of the difficulty of fulfillment and things like that. So yeah, really great to see so many physical rewards this week. I'd love to see that, more of that sort of thing in the future, I think. For now, this is going to be it for this week. Please do, if you're going to back any of these campaigns, swing down into the comments section, let me know what you're backing, why you're backing it, what you're doing in the hobby, what's interesting you at the moment. Give us a like and subscribe while you're doing that, and then swing by the Discord and tell me what you've backed and why, and what's catching your eye and what you're interested in. As usual, there's going to be a game design conversation between myself and Mike Hutchinson this Saturday. I'll be back again next Wednesday with another roundup. But for now, from me and from this episode of Rule of Carnage, it's going to be a thank you and goodbye. So thanks and goodbye. Bye-bye.